The Game Boy Pocket was a fantastic little handheld from Nintendo, and a great upgrade from the original Game Boy. The screen was bigger, it had less ghosting, and it was easier to see in the right lighting conditions. Also, it went from 4 AA batteries to 2 AAA batteries. Now, people took it upon themselves to make the Game Boy Pocket even better by introducing display mods such as the IPS display. Now, I bought this IPS display for around $50 and installed it, and I asked myself, was it worth it? As for the installation, if you use an original shell, you do need to trim it, and you need to be careful not to have too much dust on the display when you tape it down. But the rest of the installation is quite simple. You only need a little blob of solder to connect the power for the display. The biggest pros of the IPS display is it has even less or no ghosting at all. You have various colors you can choose, and you have a pixel mode, you could say, and just a very clean mode. And obviously the biggest pro is you can play it much better in the dark. There are some cons though. The display itself is already quite costly with $50. I've seen Game Boy Pockets go for as high as $80 in my local market. And personally, I have a bit of a fear of missing out, that I already spent the money on an IPS display when we might even have OLED displays in the near future. Now the biggest con is the battery life. The OEM lasted 9 hours and 46 minutes. The IPS at its darkest setting lasted 4 hours and 38 minutes, which is already a 53% reduction. But the IPS at its brightest setting lasted only 3 hours and 7 minutes. That's a 68% capacity decrease. Now, if all you want is to play your original Game Boy games, there are quite a few alternatives you could consider. If you want to stay with Nintendo, you could use the Game Boy Advance SP, or you could even go with a modded 3DS. In this case, I use emulation, but you can also use the Virtual Console. Nintendo ported quite a few titles over there. And also, if Nintendo is not utterly stupid, they should soon port quite a few Game Boy games on the Nintendo Switch. Of course, you don't need to stay with Nintendo. You could go with their direct competitor, Sony, and as an example, just mod your PSP. You could also go with more dedicated devices, such as the Funky S, or a more premium variant, which is something like the Analog Pocket. And speaking of Pocket, you don't even need to spend any money. You probably have one of these already in your pocket. That's probably the cheapest way you can play Game Boy games right now, when you consider that you probably already own them. And if you want buttons, you can either buy a Bluetooth gamepad or something like this GameSir X2 Pro. Now, in conclusion, I like the idea of the IPS screen, and I think it's a great first mod to pull off. But I also am a fan of preserving the original screen. But if the OEM is broken, I would probably just upgrade it to an IPS anyways. My biggest gripe, however, is the amount it eats into the batteries, and that makes the alternatives I showed, and others that exist as well, much more viable. So I myself are torn on it. I will use them to keep these devices from staying out of the trash, but I will also avoid them if I can. Now, what I would like to see is how much an OLED would improve the battery life. That would be really interesting to me. And I hope we will see OLED displays for Game Boy Pockets in the near future. And to wrap things up here, please let me know in the comments, what is your favorite device to play Game Boy games on? For me, it is the Analog Pocket, even though it's really expensive. But it has the best screen without having to modify it. Thanks for watching, And now to the time lapse. Goodbye.